The night air was cold and quiet, and the small window in the corner of the old house rattled softly each time the wind passed through the narrow street. Inside the dimly lit room, a girl sat on the floor beside her bed, hugging her knees tightly to her chest. Her name was Ira, and tears rolled silently down her cheeks as if they had become part of her daily routine. No one heard her crying. No one came to ask what was wrong. The world outside continued moving as if her sadness didn't exist. For years, Ira had cried alone in that same room, whispering questions to the silence that never answered her. Ira's life had never been easy. She grew up in a house where words were rarely kind and smiles were even rarer. Her father was always busy, working long hours, carrying the heavy burden of responsibility on his shoulders. Her mother, exhausted from life's endless worries, had little time to notice the quiet sadness in her daughter's eyes. They were not cruel people. They were simply too tired from surviving to notice the small battles their daughter fought every day inside her heart. At school, things were no better. Ira was shy and quiet, the kind of girl who sat in the back of the classroom and spoke only when asked. Her classmates barely noticed her existence unless they needed someone to laugh at. They mocked her silence, her worn-out clothes, and the way she always kept her head down. Every cruel whisper felt like a tiny cut, slowly carving wounds into her confidence. She would return home every afternoon with a heavy heart, hiding her tears until the night wrapped the world in darkness. Crying became her secret language. When the world grew too loud and too harsh, she would retreat into the safety of her room and let the tears fall. She cried for the words she never said, for the dreams she believed were too small to matter, and for the feeling that she somehow did not belong anywhere. Sometimes she wondered if anyone in the world would notice if she disappeared. But even in the deepest sadness, a tiny spark lived quietly inside her. It was not loud or powerful. It was just a small whisper that refused to die, a voice that sometimes told her she was meant for more than silent tears. One evening, after a particularly painful day at school, Ira sat by the window watching the rain fall from the dark sky. The streetlights reflected off the wet road like broken pieces of gold. She wiped her eyes and whispered to herself, "Why am I so weak?" The question hung in the air. She expected silence as always. But something inside her responded, not with words but with a strange feeling. For the first time, she wondered if crying was not weakness but proof that she still cared. The next morning began like every other day, but something felt slightly different. Ira woke up early and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were tired, but behind them was a small determination she had never noticed before. She did not suddenly become confident or brave. But she made a quiet promise to herself that day: she would not let the world define her forever. Change did not come quickly. It came in tiny steps so small that no one else noticed. Ira began by raising her hand once in class to answer a question. Her voice trembled, but she finished her sentence. The teacher nodded approvingly, and for the first time, Ira felt a flicker of pride. Days turned into weeks. She started spending time in the school library, reading books about people who had overcome impossible odds. Each story planted a seed inside her mind. If others could rise after falling, maybe she could too. One afternoon, a group of girls in her class laughed at her again while she walked through the hallway. Normally, Ira would have rushed away, holding back tears, until she reached home. But that day, something inside her shifted. She stopped walking and looked at them directly in the eyes. Her heart pounded wildly, but she spoke clearly. "You don't know me. And you don't get to decide who I am." The girls were stunned into silence. It was the first time Ira had ever stood up for herself. She walked away before her courage faded, but the moment stayed with her like a small victory. That night, she didn't cry. Months passed, and the quiet girl who once hid in the shadows slowly began to change. She joined a small debate club at school, not because she was confident, but because she wanted to challenge her fears. The first time she spoke in front of the group, her hands shook so badly she almost dropped her notes. But she finished her speech anyway. Every small success built another layer of strength inside her. Ira began to realize something powerful: fear only controlled her when she ran away from it. Outside of school, she started helping a neighbor who ran a tiny community center for children. Many of the kids there came from difficult homes, just like she did. At first, she simply helped them with homework. But soon she noticed the sadness in some of their eyes, the same sadness she once carried. One little girl named Sana reminded her of herself. Sana rarely spoke and often sat alone in the corner, quietly drawing pictures of lonely houses and cloudy skies. One day, Ira sat beside her and gently asked, "Why do you always draw the same house?" Sana shrugged and whispered, "Because it feels like me." Those words hit Ira deeply. She realized that the pain she had experienced had given her something unexpected: understanding. From that day on, she spent more time with Sana, encouraging her to talk and share her feelings. Slowly, the little girl began to smile more often. Helping others gave Ira a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The tears she once cried alone had turned into compassion for others who were struggling silently. Years passed, and the girl who once believed she was invisible began to build a life that surprised everyone around her. She studied psychology in college, determined to understand the human heart and help people who felt broken. The journey was not easy. There were still nights when doubt crept into her thoughts, whispering that she was not strong enough. But now she knew how to face those voices. She reminded herself of the girl who once cried alone in a small room and how far she had come. After graduating, Ira began working as a counselor for young people dealing with anxiety, bullying, and emotional pain. Every time she sat across from a teenager who believed they were worthless or alone, she saw pieces of her younger self. One afternoon, a girl walked into her office with tear-streaked cheeks and trembling hands. She looked exactly like the girl Ira used to be. "I feel like nobody cares," the girl whispered. Ira smiled gently and said, "I know that feeling. But I promise you something important. The person who will change your life the most is the one you see in the mirror." Over time, Ira became known for her powerful talks at schools and community events. People were inspired by her courage and wisdom, never imagining that the confident woman on stage had once been a girl who cried alone every night. During one of her speeches, she shared a simple truth with the audience. "Fear doesn't disappear because life becomes easier," she said. "Fear disappears when you decide it will no longer control your story." The crowd listened in silence as her words filled the room. But the most important moment came years later when Ira returned to the neighborhood where she grew up. The old house still stood on the quiet street, its paint faded and its windows worn by time. She stood outside for a long moment, remembering the lonely girl who once believed she had no strength. A gentle smile appeared on her face. That girl had cried countless tears, believing they were signs of weakness. But those tears had watered the seeds of courage that eventually grew into something powerful. The girl who cried alone had not disappeared. She had simply transformed. And one day, without even realizing it, she became fearless.